Teri and Doug arrived at the orphanage just a few months apart. She was nearly 7, while he had turned 8 a month before. Teri was raised by her single mother, who suddenly passed away from a late-discovered illness. With no other relatives, Teri was immediately placed in the orphanage. Doug's story was different, but ended similarly. He was an only, long-awaited child from a prosperous family. His parents doted on him, ensuring he had everything he needed. For his birthday, they took him to a circus in a neighbouring town. The day was wonderful and filled with joy, but it ended in tragedy. On the way home, their car was hit head-on by another vehicle. Doug's parents died instantly, while he only sustained minor scratches and bruises, losing consciousness from the impact. Doug had an aunt living in the country, but she declined, citing old age, health problems and a limited pension. She visited Doug at the orphanage a few times initially, but then stopped. Teri and Doug found themselves in the same orphanage, but they didn't become friends immediately. But one day during recess, Doug noticed a few boys teasing a red-haired girl by snatching her folder of notebooks and calling her names. Without hesitation, Doug, who was the tallest among his classmates and had been involved in sports from a young age, intervened. His stature implied he could easily defend himself and others. "Hand over the folder now," he commanded the startled boys. Seeing their hesitation, he grabbed the folder from one of them and gave it back to the frightened girl. He then warned the group, "If I see or hear any more insults towards her, I'll make sure you regret it." To emphasize his point, he grabbed the apparent ringleader by the collar, shaking him, while saying, "I advise against making me angry. I hope I won't have to repeat my words again." One of them promptly nodded, waved to his friends, and they all disappeared down the school corridor. Doug approached the girl. "Let's go. I'll make sure no one else hurts you. My name is Doug, and yours?" Thus began their friendship. Doug spent all his spare time with Teri, protecting her from anyone who tried to offend her. Few dared, and those who did soon learned to avoid Teri. As they grew older, their friendship evolved into a deeper, more sincere feeling. By the end of school, they couldn't imagine life without each other. Doug adored Teri, who reciprocated his love, claiming she couldn't live without him. Throughout their acquaintance, they never quarrelled. Everyone in the orphanage expected them to marry once they became adults. After graduation, they entered Teri's mother's apartment and stood breathless, hand in hand, for several minutes. Then Doug suddenly swept Teri into his arms and twirled her around the room. "We're free now," he shouted enthusiastically. Teri, laughing gleefully, playfully tapped him on the shoulder with her fists and said, "You, crazy, calm down now." For the first few months, they lived modestly, trying to find a job. Despite unclear future prospects, their love for each other and their happiness were undiminished. The couple decided to get married later when they could save up some money. "I actually want us," Doug said, hugging Teri, "to have everything like normal people. Wedding rings, a veil for you, and a beautiful white dress. So let's wait a little, okay?" Teri was prepared to wait indefinitely to be near him, so she agreed without hesitation. After completing her studies, she quickly found work in a small store as a salesperson. However, Doug wasn't as fortunate. He would leave each morning searching for employment and return upset. Teri understood that his efforts were in vain. Comforting him, she said, "Why are you worrying, dear? Everything will be fine. You're smart and capable. You'll definitely find something. In the meantime, we can live on my income." Later, Doug began going out in the evenings and returning in the mornings. Teri felt anxious, but he reassured her. "Well, what's on your mind? I got a job as a security guard at a club on the other side of town," he said. She seemed to calm down, but she couldn't understand why the club paid different amounts each time. When Doug started bringing home mysterious bags, Teri lost sleep over it. She tried asking him about the contents, to which he casually responded, "Baby, what are you imagining? A colleague asked me to store some things. He's fixing his apartment. Let them be here. We have plenty of space." Teri chose to believe these unlikely stories, fearing the alternative. However, one day, unable to resist her curiosity, she peeked into one of the bags while Doug was out shopping. Her worst suspicions were confirmed. It contained jewellery, expensive items, watches, and a natural woman's fur coat. A wave of fear washed over Teri as she quickly shut the bag and sat in the kitchen, dazed. She knew Doug was involved in something criminal, but she didn't know how to talk to him about it. Upon returning from the store, Doug noticed Teri's distress and asked, "Honey, is something wrong? You look pale, you're shivering." Teri, rattling the dishes, was preparing dinner, and afraid to look him in the eye, quietly said, "It's all right, just a little headache." Doug gently embraced her, his tone leaving no room for objections. "You should lie down now, and I'll finish everything. I'll call you as soon as dinner is ready. Perhaps you should take a pill." Teri nodded and headed to her room, hoping to figure out how to discuss what she had seen with Doug. Deep in thought and overwrought, she didn't notice when she fell asleep. An insistent doorbell woke her, and she got up and left her room. In the hallway, Doug stood and pleaded, "Sweetheart, please don't open the door. They're here for me. I'll explain everything later." The fear in his eyes left Teri frozen in place, unsure of what to do. A harsh voice behind the door brought her back to reality. It demanded voluntary entry, threatening otherwise to break down the door. The rest felt like a dream. She opened the door to 3 policemen. They showed some papers, handcuffed Doug, and started searching. The witnesses, a couple of elderly neighbours from across, watched the scene unfold. They whispered among themselves as Teri struggled to believe that this was reality and not a nightmare. At the end of the search, one of the policemen said, "Your friend has stolen so much that there will be enough charges for both of you. Yes, young lady, you may also face a sentence for complicity as an accomplice." From that very moment in Teri's life began a real nightmare, in which she blamed Doug and did not understand how he could do such a thing without even thinking that it would hurt her. From the time the police arrived, Doug never looked at her. Only, as he was led away, he whispered, "I'm sorry, my love. I just wanted us to have money, so you'd lack nothing." One of the policemen overheard this and sneered, "Don't worry, she won't need anything for a few years. The state will provide her with meals and uniforms." Interrogations, detention, and the trial followed. It was revealed that Doug had burglarized several homes and apartments in a short space of time. He sold the stolen goods to fences and pawn shops. He stated in court, "I wanted to throw a grand wedding with a limousine and a restaurant. I also wanted a larger apartment for us to raise many children, maybe even a house, and a car, of course." Teri listened silently, tears streaming down her face. Their lawyer, only fulfilling a legal obligation, did little. Doug was sentenced to 5 years, and Teri, as an accomplice, received 2.5. Upon hearing the verdict, she broke down in tears and yelled at Doug, "I hate you! Do you hear? I hate you! You've ruined our lives!" Doug wrapped his arms around his head and swayed from side to side, as if trying to block out the scene unfolding before him. They left the courtroom without even glancing at each other. It would seem that not so long ago, the lovers had become complete strangers instantly. Teri was placed in a cell with seasoned inmates. From day one, they seized every opportunity to taunt the quiet, unassuming orphan. There were nights when fear kept her awake, convinced she would be killed or attacked. Teri couldn't fathom why they harboured such hatred, turning her life into a daily nightmare. One day, an insignificant altercation escalated into her cellmates throwing her on the floor and assaulting her. If it hadn't been for the timely arrival of the guards, her life may have ended there. Teri was taken to the medical station, where, among other things, it was discovered that she was already 3 months pregnant. After that day, the girl was transferred to a cell with quieter prisoners, who were jailed for light crimes. A few weeks before giving birth, the elderly guard advised her to apply for parole. "You have a good standing here, and you're serving your first and hopefully last sentence. You'll be having a child soon. You should consider it." Although sceptical, Teri applied for parole and immediately put it out of her mind. She had her daughter on schedule, and despite everything, felt joy when she saw her for the first time. The baby girl strongly resembled her as a child, and Teri was glad that she took after her and not her absent father. When her daughter was just over 2 months old, Teri was informed that her parole application had been approved and she was free. She was relieved that she still had her mother's apartment, which had been closed all this time. However, now she needed to find a way to support herself. And soon the Almighty decided to help the poor woman. As she went for a walk with her daughter, she noticed an ad at the entrance of her building. "Cleaner required at nearby office." Teri immediately went to the address, realizing with her past and a child in her arms, this was the only kind of job she could get. At the personnel department, she was greeted by a young woman with kind eyes. But upon hearing her situation, she said, "I'm really sorry, but we can't hire you, not with a criminal record and a newborn baby. By the way, why didn't you at least leave your child at home when you came here?" Barely holding back tears, Teri replied, "I have no one to leave my child with. I'm a single mother with no relatives or close friends. Please give me a chance. I can clean in the evening when no one is around. I'll put my daughter into the bed and then clean up. She's a good sleeper. I desperately need this job." The woman looked at Teri with pity and sympathy. After a moment of thought, she said, "Sit down. I'll see what I can do." She dialed a number from memory. When someone answered, she said cheerfully, "Hi, Helen, how are you? Did you mention needing a cleaner?" No, I'm not looking for a job. I know someone who needs one. May I send her over to talk to you?" "Okay, thank you." After hanging up, she wrote an address on a piece of paper and handed it to Teri. "This is the address of my friend who's in charge. Her name is Mrs. Sheridan. I don't know where you'll be able to put your child, though. I assume you don't even have a stroller?" Teri, lowering her eyes, quietly replied, "No, but I'll think of something." The woman sighed and suddenly said, "You know what? Come here today at 6. I live a couple of houses down and I'll bring you my daughter's stroller. I was going to throw it away, but it looks like it has to work for a while longer." That day seemed to Teri like the most successful one in recent times. She secured a job. The salary wasn't substantial, but she could take little Alice with her. The HR woman brought out not only a very comfortable stroller, but also 2 bags of nearly new children's clothes. Also, she invited Teri to come along on her day off, saying, "You and I are of the same build. I think I can gather some clothes for you too." Teri was immensely grateful to Holly. Without her help, the job search might have taken much longer. Now every morning she went to work with her daughter. The lack of a strict schedule was a big advantage. The main thing was to get everything done during the day. Teri would rock the baby and, leaving her in a stroller, start cleaning. Then she moved to the next floor and repeated the process. Thus, while her daughter slept, Teri managed to complete everything in 2 rounds. The boss, Mrs. Sheridan, was delighted with her new employee, and every time she met her she said, "Well, I don't know how to thank Holly for such a worker. Before you, we had many irresponsible and unreliable employees who would work for a day and disappear for a week. I was literally ready to start cleaning myself. However, I feel bad for Alice. I'll try to figure something out." A few days later, while Teri was cleaning, Mrs. Sheridan returned with good news. "I made an arrangement with an acquaintance of mine who is now a pensioner, and she agreed to look after Alice while you clean up. Looking confused, Teri replied softly, "But I won't be able to afford that. I'm barely making ends meet as it is." Mrs. Sheridan smiled again, saying, "Oh, you don't need to pay anything. Mrs. Brooks will do it out of kindness. Well, you can go to the store or pharmacy when she needs it." From then on, Teri left her daughter with Mrs. Brooks, a very kind elderly woman, when she went to work. The young woman thanked God for bringing such wonderful people into her life. They quickly found common ground, as they both had no relatives and did their best to survive. Mrs. Brooks's husband had passed away 5 years ago, a year after their only son's death. Whenever the elderly woman spoke about them, she would tear up and say, "That's how it happened. They are together now, and I'm alone here. I've been praying to God to take me to his home, but it seems it's not my time yet. So, I'll help you." Teri and her daughter began visiting Mrs. Brooks more frequently in Teri's spare time. The young woman helped around the house, cleaned, occasionally cooked and ran errands. On sunny days, all three enjoyed strolling in the nearby park. Time flew by, and when little Alice turned 1.5, Mrs. Sheridan helped Teri enroll her into a nursery. Mrs. Sheridan also found Teri one more part-time job. "The job isn't tough and it pays well," she mentioned while providing the address. "But I hope you'll still work for me." "Thank you so much for everything. Of course, I will not leave you, and will always remember everything you have done for me." Now Teri was responsible for cleaning in the residential complex and in the beauty salon. She tried to forget her prison past, but the local district police officer would occasionally remind her. Whenever Teri saw the officer at her door, she knew there had been another theft or robbery in the neighborhood. Despite her efforts to explain that she had a job and a little daughter, he continued to check her. When Alice turned 6, she asked, frightened upon seeing the police officer at their door again, "Mum, why does he always come to us?" Teri kissed her daughter and replied, "He's just checking that no one is bothering us. Go to your room. I'll tell him we're fine and he'll leave." When the door closed behind her daughter, Teri whispered to the district officer, "Please, never ask your questions in front of my daughter. I don't want her to know about my past." "Sooner or later she'll find out," the man said sadly. "There are many people who talk. It would be better if you tell her where she was born and how you got there." Seemingly apologetic, he added, "Teri, I'm sorry to disturb you. I see you're working tirelessly to ensure your daughter lacks nothing. But it's my job. I must visit people with a past like yours first." She understood everything perfectly well. After answering all the questions, she escorted the policeman to the door. Once he was gone, Alice ran out into the hallway. "Mummy, let's go quickly," the little girl shouted excitedly. "There's a swimming competition." Ever since she was about 3 years old, Alice was glued to the TV whenever swimmers were performing. After every broadcast, she would look at her mother with hopeful eyes and say, "Mummy, when will you enroll me in swimming? I will perform beautifully, and you will be proud of me." Teri always promised her in response, but never kept her promise. But one day Alice, with tears in her eyes, asked, "Mum, why do you always promise? I really want to swim and you just keep saying, 'Okay, we'll go there,' but nothing doesn't change." That day, her daughter cried so bitterly that Teri decided she would fulfill her promise no matter what. In the morning, after taking her daughter to the school, she went to the swimming pool. It was just one bus stop away from their house, and she quickly reached the beautiful sports complex. But when she found out how much lessons cost, Teri was upset, but she paid for 1 month. It was the amount of money that Teri could put aside for the last 2 months of work. She intended to spend it on buying new boots to replace the tattered ones she was wearing now, but she couldn't let Alice down. After work, she bought a swimming cap and a swimsuit for her daughter from a second-hand shop. In the evening, during dinner, Teri shared the news. Alice was overcome with disbelief and excitement, and she asked in a shaky voice, "Is it true? Will I swim?" Teri hugged her daughter, gave her a kiss and replied, "Of course, my good girl. You'll be the best swimmer, I'm sure of it." Teri couldn't bear to tell her daughter that her happiness would be short-lived, lasting only a month, because they could no longer afford these lessons. But the poor woman decided to give her daughter at least a little joy. Alice eagerly anticipated her first class. The entire evening prior, she paraded around the apartment in her swimsuit, and Teri even asked with amusement, "Are you planning to sleep in that outfit tonight?" Saturday morning arrived, and Teri accompanied her daughter to the pool. Alice was looking around with bright, excited eyes, clutching her mother's hand tightly. The young coach instructed parents to observe from the benches along the walls. After placing her daughter under the coach's supervision, Teri moved aside. Seeing the well-dressed mothers, it was clear that Teri was the only one who had spent her last money on these lessons. The others were evidently well off. However, noting the coach treated each child equally, Teri felt reassured. But merely 5 minutes into the class, 3 girls began to disrupt proceedings. Despite the coach's patient attempts to discipline them, the girls continued to speak loudly and point at Alice. "What are you doing here? Where did you find that outfit? In a trash heap?" one of them asked, laughing uproariously. "You look like a turtle from the swamp," echoed his friend. One of the mothers turned to Teri with a grimace, saying through clenched teeth, "They let just anyone in. I hope your daughter doesn't infect our children with anything. Does she even have a medical certificate?" Teri chose to ignore this. She was willing to endure anything for her daughter to swim. The coach couldn't hear the mothers of the children. They were on the other side of the pool, but he tried to discipline the girls. But he did it very hesitantly and only once. He was well aware of whom these girls' fathers were, prominent businessmen in the city with extensive connections, and the girls' mothers were known for their fiery tempers. If the coach truly tried to discipline these young troublemakers, he'd quickly find himself jobless, a prospect he clearly wanted to avoid. Noticing that the rich girls kept insulting Alice and that she had tears in her eyes, Teri got up and walked over to the parents who were standing by the water. She had already realized that poor people like her were assigned specific spots away from the pool, while the affluent were entitled to move around freely, closely monitoring their children's progress from the water's edge. Teri, maintaining her composure and articulating each word clearly, said, "I ask you to calm your children down right now." The 2 ladies with manicures and artificial eyelashes exchanged glances and laughed loudly by the pool. "Did you hear that?" one of them began, seemingly ignoring Teri. "Is this country bumpkin threatening us? I don't understand how she got here. I should lodge a complaint. I'm not letting my daughter share a group with this poor beggar." In the next moment, before anyone could react, Teri lunged at these rude women and pushed them into the pool. Silence followed for a second, and then chaos began. The scandalized women screamed hoarse that they could not swim and tried to get out of the water by grabbing the edges of the pool. The children watched in stunned silence. The coach, dressed fully, rushed to their aid and helped the women to get out of the pool. The once haughty, well-dressed ladies now resembled shapeless wet toads. Their blouses, clinging to their bodies, revealed their far-from-perfect figures. Once on dry land, instead of expressing gratitude, they immediately started berating the coach. Already at the exit, one of the rescued yelled, "If you can't train normal children, then get out of here. You're certainly fired. I'll go to the director right now, and you can pack your bags." Teri looked at her frightened daughter, regretting that her first class had ended before it even started. She managed to convince the girl to change her clothes and head home, promising they would return some day. Upon exiting the sports centre, Teri instantly noticed the coach sitting on a nearby bench. It was clear the management had given in to complaints and laid him off. Seeing his distress, Teri decided to offer her support. "Please forgive me," she reassured him. "I never anticipated this outcome, but I couldn't let my daughter be mistreated. I'm sure you'll find another job." Mike responded with a sorrowful expression. "I understand. But how is it my fault? I always treated all the children equally and avoided conflicts, yet here I am. I even risked myself to save those women, and I was laid off in gratitude." They conversed for a while. Alice played on a nearby playground. As they prepared to leave, Mike offered to escort them home. They continued chatting at the entrance of the apartment building, and at that moment Teri found herself reluctant to part ways with Mike, and he, seemingly, sensed her feelings. "Shall we go for a walk all together tomorrow? We could visit the park or go to the movies," he proposed. When Teri explained that she had to work, he suggested meeting after she finished. Teri was ashamed to admit who and where she was working, and she offered to meet near the school Alice attended. Soon their meetings became a regular occurrence, and soon Teri knew he was the type of man she wanted in her life. Mike was caring, intelligent, and polite. A few weeks into their meetings, Teri decided to invite Mike over. She resolved to reveal her past and present that evening, as living a lie was proving too difficult, and she knew the truth would eventually surface. Starting the conversation was difficult, but Teri finally said, "Mike, I enjoy your company. I feel comfortable and happy around you, but I need to be honest about my life. I misled you. I'm not a saleswoman. I wish I could be, but my past restricts me to the role of a cleaner." She lowered her gaze, fearful of Mike's reaction as she confessed everything. He listened in silence, not uttering a word. When she finished, he rose and simply held her, whispering, "My little fool, did you really think I'd just up and leave like that? I don't care what happened before. What matters is that I have you now. I want to be by your side always, my girls." Teri snuggled into his chest, feeling relieved for the first time in years. That same night, Mike revealed that he had been married for 2 years, only to experience a tragic loss. His wife was hit by a drunk driver while she was 3 months pregnant. "That's how I was widowed before I could be a real husband and become a father." Mike finished his story with a sad note. The next morning, they awoke in each other's arms for the first time, vowing never to part again. A few weeks later, Mike found a new job and persuaded Teri and her daughter to move in with him. He then convinced Teri to quit one of her jobs. "I earn well. We have enough. Washing entrances is tough work, which I don't want my beloved to do," Mike said seriously. "If you want to maintain some independence, you can continue cleaning the beauty salon. But you know, I don't like it." Despite her happiness, Teri was still hesitant, feeling that if anything happened, she wouldn't be able to find employment again. So she decided to continue working at the beauty parlour. Looking at the relationship between Mike and Alice, Teri often thought that he was the kind of father she had always wished for her daughter. Mike was always concerned about Alice's well-being, and would even rush to the pharmacy in the middle of the night for her medication when she was sick. As summer began, Mike recalled Alice's aspiration to learn to swim, and decided to teach her. "Every weekend, we'll visit the river," Mike cheerfully announced at dinner. "I know of a wonderful spot where the current isn't too strong. It's even a better place to learn to swim than in a pool." Alice's joy knew no bounds. She hugged Mike tightly and whispered, "You're the best.
I wish you were my dad."
"Alice, what are you saying?" Teri tried to interrupt. Mike placed Alice on his lap, smiled and said,
"Why not? I'd be delighted. But we should ask your mum if she'd like someone like me to be your dad."
Teri smiled. "Yes, I would like that very much."
"Well, that's good. Tomorrow we'll apply for the marriage. But for now, let's go to bed. It's late,"
Mike concluded to everyone's pleasure. The next morning, Mike pleaded with the stern lady at the registry office to expedite their application, but she was unyielding, firmly stating that the laws and rules applied to everyone. Thus the earliest available date was a month and 3 days later. Stepping outside, Mike hugged Teri and said with a smile,
"It's okay, this won't change anything. A month will fly by before you know it. The main thing is that God gave you to me. All thanks to you and Alice going to that damn pool."
Meanwhile, as it turned out, the scandal at the pool left its mark. The antics of the rich, arrogant women were captured on the sports complex's security cameras. Likely, one of the guards recorded the most dramatic moments from the start of the scandal. The video spread across the internet, and within a few days it was everywhere. The rich women were now recognized on the streets, their fashionable, loose clothing and heavy makeup no longer hiding their true selves. The angry ladies decided to seek revenge on the pool coach and the beggar who had pushed them into the pool. They sought them both out and were immensely surprised to find the perpetrators of their disgrace living in happiness and absorbed in wedding preparations. Although they decided not to organize a lavish celebration, an evening for loved ones was still planned. Mike had lost both of his parents while he was in the second year of college. His mother had passed away from a serious illness, and his father, unable to cope with the loss and loneliness, had died in his sleep 6 months later. Mike only had one relative remaining, an uncle who lived in another state and with whom he maintained contact. He decided to invite them, along with a few of his school friends, to the wedding. Teri, on the other hand, wanted to invite Holly and Mrs. Sheridan, who had supported her during difficult times. She also wanted to invite Mrs. Brooks, who had become a part of her family. A small cosy cafe was booked, and rings were purchased. The only thing left was to choose the outfits. Over the weekend, Teri was ready to buy a dress, but hesitated and asked Mike, "Honey, can I go alone? They say it's bad luck if the groom sees the bride's dress before the wedding." The man laughed and replied, "You're my superstitious one. As you wish. We'll go to the river with Alice. After all, summer is ending soon and we have plans." Teri quickly chose an outfit. It was a cream dress with a lace bodice embroidered with beads. She chose a similarly coloured dress for Alice with a multi-layered puffy skirt. Returning home, satisfied and happy, Teri began preparing dinner while humming a tune she'd heard somewhere. Suddenly the phone rang. She picked up the receiver, listened to the caller in silence, then excitedly responded, "I'll be right there. What's the address?" She quickly gathered herself, her mind in turmoil. Teri couldn't believe what she had been told. A policeman had reported finding her daughter Alice alone and crying on the riverbank. Hailing a cab, Teri quickly arrived at the station, where her terrified daughter rushed into her arms, sobbing.
"Mummy, Mike drowned," Alice cried. "I looked away for just a moment to pick some flowers for you. When I came back, he was gone. All that was left were his sneakers and clothes on the shore."
Alice sobbed uncontrollably, and Teri began to soothe her. "Oh, honey, how could Mike drown? He's a swimming coach." With these words, she tried to comfort not only her daughter, but also herself. She wanted to believe it was impossible, but the policeman said the evidence was irrefutable. Mike was gone. On the drive home, Teri tried to hide her own emotions from Alice. "Mummy, don't cry," Alice said, stroking her mother's hair. "I'm here for you. I'll always care for you and love you, just like Mike did."
Her daughter's words made her calm down. During the day, Teri mechanically went to work while her daughter was at school. She would pick her up later and they'd go home. Only when her daughter Alice was asleep did Teri allow herself to cry. One evening, Teri had a vivid dream. Her missing fiancé was alive and unhurt, sitting in a tiny, windowless, stone-walled room that resembled a barn or cellar. The cold and dampness felt so real that she pulled the blanket over her head in her sleep. Mike seemed to be calling for help, but she could barely comprehend his words. Awakening in a cold sweat, Teri wanted to forget the nightmare. However, the dream was so real that she decided to report it to the police. When Teri shared her suspicions, the duty officer, clearly annoyed by her visit, asked whether Mike had any enemies or anyone with whom he had quarrelled. Teri remembered a recent incident that Mike had told her about. He had recently confronted that arrogant woman at the pool. She had called him names and seemed ready to attack him, and Mike's smirk had only made her angrier. Teri shared the pool incident and the woman's threats of revenge with the officer, but it was clear that he had no interest in dealing with this matter. Engaging in the quarrels of well-known businessmen and their wives was a surefire way to invite trouble. Under normal circumstances, he would have relegated this case to a distant draw, but this time Teri was fortunate. Glancing the grey-haired man seated at a nearby table, the officer accepted her application. As it happened, there was an ongoing audit in the department, which compelled the police officer to respond properly to her visit. Then all parties involved in the old conflict were investigated. All properties owned by the families were taken into account, and finally, in one of the country houses, the police discovered a cellar where they found Mike. Thin and covered in stubble, he could barely stand. The house owner tried to justify himself to the police. "I didn't mean any harm. I just wanted to teach him a lesson. I have nothing against him personally, but when my wife saw the video of him falling into the water on the internet, every day she nagged me to find him and teach him a lesson. You know how relentless a woman can be once she latches onto an idea? I promise I'll make amends and compensate. Please relay my message to the victims." The wealthy businessman paid a substantial amount for emotional distress and vowed never to interfere in the couple's life again. Upon returning home, Mike mentioned to Teri that the businessmen were discussing an online video clip. They quickly found and watched the video, laughing heartily at its contents. "Yes, you're a true person's heroine," Mike affectionately exclaimed, kissing his beloved. "Look at all these comments. I bet about 90% of people are awed by your bravery. They're probably relieved that someone finally put those who thought they were above everyone else in their place. Upon discovering Teri's newfound fame, a makeup artist from the salon where Teri worked suggested starting a blog. She even assisted in bringing the idea to life. Soon, Teri's blog attracted a vast number of followers who were interested in her life. She received advertising contract offers from 2 companies. After leaving her job, she dedicated herself fully to her new hobby, which generated a substantial income. Mike was thrilled about his bride's infatuation, but the only thing he didn't really like was that because of her busy schedule, she could not find the time to go with him to the registry office and to finally become a wife and a husband. Because of that incident with the rich people, they didn't show up for the ceremony on the scheduled date last time, and Mike had already suggested several times to apply again. "Don't you want to get married any more?" he asked his beloved once. "Of course I do," Teri replied tenderly, kissing him and wrapping her arms around his neck. "I love you dearly, and we will definitely get married. But let's do it a little later when I have more time. We are together, and that's what matters most." Mike didn't bring up the topic again. Life continued as usual. One day, after taking Alice to school, Teri returned home to write a new post and contact advertisers. As she approached the entrance, she noticed a familiar silhouette. The man also recognized her and waved cheerfully. However, Teri felt no joy at this encounter. "Didn't expect to see me, did you?" Doug smirked. "I thought I'd never see you again, and then I came across a familiar face online. I missed you." He reached out to touch her face, but Teri recoiled and pushed his hand away. "Why are you here? What do you want? I don't owe you anything," she asked sharply, and was about to leave, but Doug, who had just been released from the jail, grabbed her wrist sharply. Holding her hand tightly, the man hissed, "I don't think so. I saw a little girl in one of your videos, and you were speaking about her as if she's your daughter. I did the math and figured out she's mine. Isn't she?" Teri attempted to free her arm, but the ex-convict wrapped both arms around her waist, pulling her close. He whispered in her ear, "You won't escape from me that easily. My daughter! Either you pay me off, or I'll visit her every day." At that moment, Mike suddenly appeared, and looking confused, asked, "What's going on, Teri? Can you explain?" The woman pushed Doug away and started explaining who he was and what he wanted. But interrupting her, Doug suggested, "Why don't we move this conversation to your house?" house. I assume you wouldn't want the neighbours to witness this scene and potentially post it online," he said wryly.
Teri tried to drive the intruder away, but Mike interjected menacingly.
"Why not? I hope to learn something interesting that I didn't know about your relationship."
From the moment Doug entered the apartment, he began to act arrogantly, asserting that he should be treated as an honoured guest because he is Alice's biological father. When he left that evening, he claimed that he would regularly visit Alice, which disrupted the peaceful atmosphere in their home. Tension arose between Mike and Teri, like a black cat crossing their path. Despite Teri's explanations, Mike became distant, transforming from a cheerful, loving man to someone withdrawn and lost in his thoughts. He began drinking at a bar almost every evening, and Teri was unsure how to salvage their relationship. She tried talking, pleading, explaining, and even arranged a romantic dinner. And then one night, Mike did not come home. Teri had been calling him all the night, but he didn't answer. Fearing that something had happened to him again, Teri went to his workplace the next morning. Seeing Mike unharmed, she immediately tried to talk. "Honey, where did you spend the night? I was worried sick." The man interrupted her mid-sentence, stating, "I'm not coming home again. Now that the girl has a father, you two should raise her together. I'm not rushing you, but I suggest you return to your apartment and start building a new relationship with him." With these words, he turned away, showing that the conversation was over. Teri was shocked, but she also realized that she had to resolve the issue with Doug first. It was clear that he intended to get financial compensation in exchange for his agreement not to interfere in her life. However, she also knew that if the victim starts paying, she continues to do so for the rest of her life. In the end, Teri decided to solve the issue with Doug strictly through legal means. But to her great surprise and relief, it turned out to be unnecessary. It appeared that Doug had not learned from his years in prison and had returned to his old ways. Predictably, he was soon caught by law enforcement and received an even longer sentence. Teri sighed with relief. While she felt sorry for Doug, she knew he had chosen his path by himself. A week later, Mike returned. He entered the apartment timidly, holding a bouquet of flowers. "I'm sorry, Teri. I've been a fool. Jealousy almost drove me crazy. I thought you still loved him, especially since he's your child's father. I'm sorry, sweetheart. I've felt terrible these past few weeks without you. I missed you and tried to numb it with alcohol." Teri remained silent, nestled into his chest, afraid to pull away. Mike, pulling back slightly, took her face in his hand and kissed her. A month later, they finally married. Teri wore the same cream dress she had bought for their first unsuccessful celebration. As the champagne was poured, she covered her glass with her hand and requested juice from her husband. "Beloved, don't you want to toast our finally accomplished wedding?" Mike asked in surprise. She smiled mysteriously and replied, "I think it wouldn't be good for our baby boy or girl." Taking his wife's hands in his own, Mike, his voice trembling with excitement, asked, "Is it true? We're having a baby?" "And I want a little sister," Alice exclaimed, running to the newlyweds and hugging them both. That day, everyone radiated joy, realizing a new, happier life was about to begin.